Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Worship Guitar Show. So glad that you could join us. We have an amazing show for you. Stu G and St. Pope, two of the most amazing, influential, iconic, tone setting, and humble guitar players I've ever met. And with that said, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey,
Hey
thank
guys,
you. What an introduction.
I don't know how humble we are after all those nice things you said about us.
I know. And we've got to live up to it now.
Oh man, the pressure.
Well, I actually am the one that should probably apologize. So, as I was mentioning, Stu, as we were hanging out, I kind of butted into the conversation. It's kind of when you see two guitar players kind of having a bonding moment, it's actually really rude to kind of come up and go, "Hey, can I hang out?" And I saw that amazing photo of you guys on Instagram, and I was like, okay, I don't care what I've got to do. How can I get the two of these guys on the show together? So thank you for making time. And I'm just, I'm so excited to talk about a range of things. As I kind of put in one of the notes, we're going to get a chance to talk about guitars, gear, and God. So the first thing I'd like to start off with is three questions. What was the turning point in your life that led you to the Lord?
I'll go if you like. It was a Phil Keaggy concert. Yeah, we were living in the UK, and I grew up in a Christian home, but hadn't really kind of caught on and followed Jesus, and but I loved guitar playing, and guitar music, and someone had given me an album called Town to Town by Phil, and then we heard that he was coming to London to play a concert, and so Karen and I, my wife, who was my fiance at the time, we went to the concert, not knowing that it was part of a big evangelical event or evangelistic event, and we both gave our lives to Jesus at a Phil Keaggy concert.
That's awesome. St.
That's
Pope,
very cool.
that's amazing. No, that's
Man,
phenomenal.
I wish I had as cool of a story as Phil Keaggy, but mine felt a little embarrassing in a way. Like I grew up, my entire life going to church, and for a long time, being a little teenage kid playing guitar, growing up in a small town, church was very much like the Christian faith is, how I was raised, and this is my opportunity to go out and play music with people. And so I just happened to be, playing music at some random little church in this little town called McAllister. And I can't explain it. I don't really know what it was, but I got done playing the set, and I'm sitting in the crowd, not really paying attention to what the guy's saying. And all of a sudden, like, I noticed there's an altar call going on, and and you just get that like gut feeling that you just can't shake. And it was more that like it was more than just that thing you get when you're a teenager and you're like nervous when the guy's saying stuff. It's like something about this is very real all of a sudden, and I can't shake it. I can't explain it, but I like have to go down and accept this altar call. Like no is not an option at this point. And it was super embarrassing to be the like guy on stage is like, hey, I'm a church leader, or like, I'm on stage at church and I'm going down to, say that, oh yeah, I actually believe this now. But it was just kind of that simple moment for me where it was like, all right, well, this is real now. And now I know it's real. It's not just the way I was raised. This is, my decision, and a mutual decision between me and the Lord. So yeah, super, super simple. Not as many great riffs involved as I'm sure Phil Keaggy had going on.
Equally heartfelt, though. That's lovely.
Yeah.
you said the word stage, platform, stage, whatever the heck you want to call it. My guess is that each one of you has one incredible stage disaster where anything that could go wrong went wrong. Are there any that jump out immediately off the top of your memory?
Oh man. Well, I guess I can lead the charge on this one. Man, I had probably been playing at Bethel for 2-3 years at this point, and when you're playing a set with Jen, you gotta watch, because sometimes she'll stick to an arrangement. Most of the time, she'll just kind of throw signals and let you know where she wants to go. Well, I kind of got in autopilot mode one night, and we're playing a song called "Come to Me," which is like this very gentle song until this bridge hits, and then it's just you kick on your fuzz pedal, you're hitting big, power chords, just making a bunch of noise. And so we're playing this really chilled down chorus, and I'm like, all right, here we go. Get the pedals ready for this big loud section. And I totally missed her go like this, which means let's play this soft, gentle chorus again. So of course, I just, all volume, all fuzz, rip into that bridge part, and very quickly realized I made a very, very bad mistake. Yeah, that's probably the worst one for me. I mean, that's not like gear failing. That's all user error on that one.
And it was a moment where everybody kind of knew it was.
Oh yeah.
You.
Oh yeah. I was the only electric guitar player around, man. Brian was on acoustic, and I don't even think we were doing tracks in those days. So, yeah, man, it was a moment.
Stu,
you gotta have a couple, but is there one that jumps out?
Yeah. So I had a period where I used the Morley wah volume pedal, and it was an optical LED operated one, not a pot. And we went out onto the stage at Creation Festival, Creation West in Washington at the Gorge, and put the toe down to make a lot of noise, and nothing happened. And it took a long time to figure out why for half that set my guitar wasn't working, and it was a certain color red light on the stage shining into my pedal, turning it off. Yeah way. And I had it at one other gig. Yeah. So
wow.
I don't use them anymore.
That could be awkward.
Yeah.
Stu, one of the things we were talking about a little earlier was this concept of tall trees. And I would love it if you guys could speak to the concept of raising up that next generation and kind of, first of all, the people that are watching, I think they're pretty much all church people. And that concept of discipleship is such an integral part of, my guess would be, your journeys coming up to be tall trees, but also part of being a tall tree is raising up that generation behind you. Could you speak to that, please?
Yeah, I mean, looking back, I'm just so grateful for the people that I'd served with or played with. So before Delirious, people like Kevin Prosh, people like Noel Richards from the UK, who, you don't necessarily go to someone and say, "Oh, you're going to disciple me now." It's kind of a bit weird actually to say that, but but that's what's happening when you're doing life with people, and that's what's happening when you realize that these certain folks have kind of gone before and opened up the way for you to do what you can do, and so and I think that happens both on the skill level in terms of your craft, and then on the character level too, and somehow doesn't always, not always successful at it, but the idea of like getting discipled in craft and character at the same time is the goal, really. And so I think being a few years in now, and having the opportunity to chat, even just like this, and pass on whatever, hopefully whatever wisdom we've gathered. I don't take that lightly. I feel it's an honor and a privilege, and just to still be, talking about making music and having the chance to play at churches or be on tour or whatever it is such a super honor. And like mentoring and speaking into people's lives, whether that be on a guitar level or on a life level, is just such a great honor, and one that I feel is definitely a part of everybody's life.
I love that.
Yeah, I don't know how I could say it any better than that. And I mean, being at Bethel and kind of helping raise some of the younger guys up, there was one thing. But for now in my life, it looks like doing these live streams, or especially during the pandemic, doing Zoom lessons with people. And the thing you find out is, like, most of the time people have a few guitar questions and a few things they want to learn. And most of it is them wanting to talk about their lives and what's going on and looking for advice in that. And it's kind of strange how something as simple and seemingly small as like a guitar lesson turns into people asking you, like total strangers, like, people, haven't met before, one of these lessons, like, asking for sometimes pretty major life advice. And it's a very humbling position to be in. Sometimes an awkward position to be in, but just kind of like Stu said, just feeling the honor and the reverence of that. And, I guess trying to do your best with that moment in time you're given with that person, I think is what it's all about. And especially now, like in the 21st century, where we have these live streams and all these things, like discipleship looks so different than it ever has before. But I think it's an amazing thing, and it's certainly encouraging for me too, as as also someone who's just a regular guy and a guitar fan, to hear what other people have to say and apply those things to my own life. So it goes both ways now, and
totally
it's
does.
a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were saying that, like, how encouraged I am when someone will stop you, like at the NAMM show or something, and just say, "Oh man, I use your, effects preset or whatever it is, your Kemper thing," and or that people reach out to you and encourage you in some way, and it's like, that never gets old, does it?
No, it really doesn't. It's a very special thing, and you just do your best to not take it for granted, hey?
Yeah. I remember actually getting a text message from Gabe Wilson.
Oh man.
And
Old man Wilson.
Yeah, and we had toured with them when they were doing Rock and Roll Worship Circus, and then listening.
I saw you guys on that tour.
No way, that's amazing. And in fact, their song, "I Love the Rain," from Rock and Roll Worship Circus, is still today one of my favorite worship songs ever.
It's so good.
Yeah, just remember that moment, seeing them live. Anyway, the point of this text message was you and him, and you were playing the lick to Feel It Coming On, a Delirious song. And that was so, like, I've showed so many people that clip. I love it.
Oh,
It's so
thanks, man.
encouraging, though. It's so encouraging to me.
Well, that's encouraging to me, man. I mean, not to sit here and fangirl all day, but as a younger guy who has been playing guitar literally their whole life, and in some ways was, kind of had church music forced upon him. And obviously there's positives and negatives with that, but as a young guy looking for like, all right, what's the real stuff? What's the stuff that's worth pulling from? What's the stuff that connects with my heart? You're not necessarily being able to articulate it that way, but going on that journey, man, like you and Chris Greeley are my dudes. I was aware of you guys long before I was allowed to listen to a Jimi Hendrix or a Jimmy Page or The Edge, or any of the greats that we all look up to. So it's crazy to sit here and do a live stream with you, or hang at your house and swap out microphones and guitars.
I know. I was just going to say
fun.
that though. I was just going to say that though, because like that. You might start off like following someone and liking them, and then all of a sudden you get to a point where like I'm serious when I was like asking you all the questions about the microphones, and and is that sound okay? Like, because your ears are like way dialed in more than I am, all your studio experience and what have you. And also like when you were doing a Bethel tour, you came to Nashville, Martin was singing, and he invited me up to do.
Oh yeah, I remember that day vividly.
That was fun, wasn't it? That was a great time. But I'll never forget being blown away by you and Bobby Strand, and your tones and the Veritas guitars, and yeah.
Man, I remember that day. I think it was maybe the day before we were, headed to Nashville, and Martin came around and was just like, "Hey guys," I think Bobby and I were sitting, in catering or something. And it's just like, hey, I think Stu's going to join us for Rain Down tomorrow. And we're both just like, are you kidding? Like, what a full circle moment to like, one, be on tour with a guy like Martin, but then just specifically as a guitar player, that moment was just.
It was so fun.
Yeah, that's like a, top 5 of my whole life there. So
that's great. I love it.
Top 5. All right. In a minute, we're going to talk about gear. But before we get there, I want to zero in on a singular question. Is there one piece of gear, vintage, new, Dumble, whatever it is, that stands out above all others?
That we own or don't own?
Either way is fine.
Oh man, there's so many things to pick.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I'll say this because it's been on my mind lately. I went to Carter's a little while ago to demo some Walrus pedals, and when you walk into a place like that, and the guys in the shop are like, "Hey, like what do you want to play?" Essentially giving you your run of the place. You always, anytime you're asked that question, you let those guys pick, because those guys know the good stuff in there. They're in the shop every day, and so that's what I said. I was like, you guys pick something cool. I'll check out anything. And dude came around the corner with a 1958 ES335, which is the first year for the 335, and it's an earlier one too because the neck was unbound, and that guitar. I've never had I've never been freaked out playing a guitar before, and I've been lucky and gotten to check out some really nice guitars. But for whatever reason, that guitar was just like jaw dropping, and I haven't been able to get it out of my mind since. So if I ever have $35,000 to spend on a guitar, I'm going right down to Carter's and picking that thing up, assuming it's still there.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
For me, it's a guitar as well, but it's one that is in my imagination. So My initials are SG, and
Mm.
I've never owned an SG. So I would love to have a 63 SG, um, because 63 is the year I was born, and yeah, I would love to have that. Yeah.
That's a very good one.
Love that. Love that. Yes. Well, we're on the subject of guitars. Look at those guys.
There's a
So
bunch of them there.
there's a bunch of them
Yeah.
there, and Michael, it looks like you're digging in there pretty hard there. Uh, I love the 440 sound video of you just destroying. What it was a Greer overdrive. You're just like you've got some serious
Something.
chops there, my man. This is
Yes,
like
Thanks.
he
uh,
has.
really a
Yeah.
pleasure to watch you just kind of go to work on that. Let's talk about the
Cool.
significance of a guitar because the interesting thing is, between the Les Pauls,
Hmm.
the Veritas, the Strats, the range of instruments that are there. Each one has its own thing. I'd love to know what you guys look for. My guess is, Stu, especially when you see a Les Paul, you're looking for something either that your existing Les Paul does or doesn't do, but you're looking for something specific. So I would like to start with you. Is there something in particular that, again, as we start thinking about guitars, 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 is there
Yeah.
something that, you really kind of go, hey, this is really kind of at the top of my list when we go there?
Yeah. Well, I'm a big believer in that guitars have songs in them, so they all sound a bit different, don't they? So, um, I've got two Les Pauls, um, and one is a deluxe with mini humbuckers. And so that has it's like a loud telly, but a bit fuller. Um, and as heavy as anything. And I love that guitar. It's like so special. Um, that actually came from Grun's guitars years
Mm.
and years and years ago. Um, and then my standard is a Cherry Sunburst from '97 or so, and that's completely stock. I've actually got different pickups in now, but it was completely stock, and I never saw it, never played it, and it's one of the best Les Pauls I've ever played. It feels so great and um, so easy to play. What I'm looking for though, if I was to pick up another one or a guitar at all, is I'm looking for like an even ring, like a clarity. Uh, this might be because I've played guitars for 40 years with loud amps and I'm going a little bit deaf, but I don't want to hear anything that's muddy, unless it's by design, right? Unless I put it through a color box and take all the top off or something, But when I'm just hearing pure guitar, I just want to hear clean, clear. You hear every string, and not too, um, yeah, not, not. You haven't got to try too hard to hear everything. Um, Now obviously, my Les Pauls sound different to each other, and they sound different to my 135, which has got the P100s in it, um, and that's a completely different thing too. That's got the semi-hollow thing, and so that was the Majesty guitar, song called Miracle Maker, um, a song called All the Way off King of Fools. It's that kind of sound. It's kind of got that sort of P90-ish edge, but it's got that hollow thing, but it's not quite a Gretsch. Does that make sense? So like they all sound a bit different, um, and they all have something in them that's unique.
All right, before I yield the floor to Saint Pope, you lit the fuse. So one of my favorite things in spending the afternoon hanging out with Stu G was watching you play Majesty on the 135 but then there's a video of you playing it on a Sir at standard tuning. So again, I'm sure most of the people watching know that you tune the whole guitar down, which I didn't know before. It's a
Yeah.
step and a half, the whole guitar down a step and a half. So you must be playing with like 10s or 11s. But what was really interesting was to hear the same song, the same player playing the parts with different voicings on a different guitar. I was kind of blown away. I'm kind of curious, having lived in both those places, was there a part of the Sir moment you kind of went, like it was so different?
Well, I'll tell you what that is. It's the last sort of 10 years of traveling with guitars and gear. It's just got so much more difficult to take everything you want. You can't fly with 4 guitars anymore,
Yeah.
well, especially when you're traveling on your own. And I used to joke because Delirious said, we had a long career and we built up, our thing. And so we had a tech, I had a backline guy who would help. And, moving to America on my own, when Delirious finished, and I had to find out where I was going to buy my picks from, let alone carry all my gear, anyway, I digress. Because that was a very privileged life. Anyway, the idea of taking a guitar just to play Majesty, I was thinking I've got to challenge myself, and that's the other thing too is to constantly keep learning, which is what I love about hanging out with Michael when he was over here. Because you're right. Like Michael's got serious chops, and I really loved it. And one of my favorite things of that day we spent together was when I got my old TC Sustainer out, and you plugged into that. Michael, do you remember that?
It was so that pedal was so cool.
The stuff you were playing though, it was amazing. And anyway, so to keep learning. But so for instance, I learned this chord from David Gunga. Do you know David from the Brilliance? So so if you're playing Majesty in B, which is a little bit easier on my voice, Majesty, but to get a nice voicing on that 6 minor, doing it like this doesn't sound right. So I learned this voicing.
So
yeah.
great.
Yeah. So it's kind of like it really works. You can kind of fake that feel of the open string. And thanks to David Gunga for showing me that way of playing a minor chord.
I love it. All right, St. Pope. So you're up. Tell us about the guitars. I tell you what, we've been through your collection a couple of times. Maybe just, well, actually, no, there's that one Veritas that Casey did that was the knockoff of the Gibson, right?
Yeah, the gold top.
That guitar, honestly, the funny thing is that I've kind of fixated on most of your guitars, but that one in particular, you have built a mountain of interest in my guitar player. I don't know, guitar lust.
Okay.
But can you tell us a little bit about that guitar, because that really sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I'd love to. So my whole life, I mean, probably again watching Stu, I've always been a Gibson guy before I was a Fender guy. But every time, as a kid, I went to go play a Gibson. I really loved SGs. My dad will tell you I was obsessed with SGs growing up. But every time I go play them, it just didn't feel right. And anytime I pick up a guitar, ever since I was a kid, I can look at it and have an idea of what it's supposed to sound like. And if it doesn't live up to that, then I I don't buy it, or I'll never play it again. And so the gold top from Casey came about because at the time I was having a hard time finding. I really wanted a Gibson gold top with P90s, but I just wasn't finding one that I connected with. And at the time, Bethel Music was kind of blowing up and getting a little bigger. And I had all these custom guitar companies, sending me emails and messages like, "Hey man, love Bethel Music. We'll build you a guitar, anything you want. What do you want?" And I would always tell them, "Well, okay, I want a Les Paul Jr." Thinking what guitar could be more simple to build than a Les Paul Jr. And my first guitar was an Epiphone Les Paul Jr., so it kind of harkened back to that. And every single one of those guitar companies were like, "Oh, sorry, man, we don't do those. Do you want a Tele?" And I was like, "No, I've already got one of those." And they're like, "Well, okay, do you want a Strat? We can make you a Strat." And I've just never been the Strat guy for whatever reason. So I was just like, "Nah, that's okay. I'll keep looking." And then one day, Greeley and Bobby were like, "Hey, we've got this friend that builds guitars. He's really, really great. You should talk to him." And so Casey gave me a call, and he was literally the first guy to be like, "What do you want?" And I was like, "Well, at this point, I'm just going to go all out. All right, this is what I want, Casey. I want a 50s spec gold top because I had played a couple real, early mid 50s gold tops and was obsessed. I was like, that's what I want." And he was the first guy to just be like, "Okay, sure, I'll do that. I won't dead on copy it. I'm going to put a few of my tweaks on it because I don't do dead on copies. And I'm cool with that. I respect that all day." And so he made that guitar for me. And it was at a time, he didn't have CNC machines or anything like that. So that's not only is it the first guitar that he built for me, which having had a, relationship with him for this long, and him now being one of my better friends just in life, it's pretty cool and sentimental for that reason. But I mean, he's built me some incredible guitars, and I just always go back to that one because there's just something magical about it. It's heavy as a truck, but it's just got the tone, man. And especially since I put a Firebird pickup in the bridge, that just totally opened that guitar up. The P90 was really, really cool, but it was a little too honky. If I was playing for Lenny Kravitz or something, it would have been a cool sound, but doing more church music or more modern music, I just wanted something a little more open and a little bit more scooped. So Daniel Lanois, Neil Young, Firebird pickup in the bridge trick, and it's still my favorite guitar. And the sad thing about it is I don't have it with me right now because Casey's got a hold of it, doing a little bit of a refin on it, because when he first built the guitar, he didn't have a painter guy. So he sent it off to this guy to get painted, and the guy did more of a weird 70s gold color. So it wasn't quite authentic 50s, Gibson gold. And I was like, I don't care. I just want a cool guitar. I think it looks awesome. I'll play it, man. Send it my way. But Casey, every once in a while, I'd be like, "Man, you should let me refin that thing. Man, you should let me refin that thing. Man, you should let me refin it." And so I finally, a little while ago, was like, all right. If you think you can do it better, then go for it. So he's got it right now, and I miss it dearly. But that's definitely number one for me, man. If God forbid the house was burning down, that's the one I would grab.
It's a good thing you don't live in California.
Oh, gosh. Man. Oh, well, I survived one. And so I do know what it's like, and man, it's brutal. It's devastating. It's so scary.
Well, speaking of gold tops, so I'm going to geek out on the guitar front for a minute because, first of all, my buddy Paul's in the thread here is like, I struggle with guitar less. I love it that we've managed to confess our sins with each other. I think that's a good thing. Real men can confess their guitar lust and love Jesus. That's a pretty amazing thing. So the neat
Hmm.
thing is that a lot of the gold tops, and this is a refinished gold top, but a number of the gold tops were actually bursts. And a
Hmm.
lot of people didn't necessarily know this. And so I've got a buddy that's a collector. And so one of the things that you could tell is you'd pull the pickups out, pull the pickup covers off, and you can kind of see that there's actually some of the bursts still hiding in there, or some you
Wow.
could actually see the lamination or whatever whenever it's been refinished. Sorry, there
Hmm.
wasn't the burst; it was the you could see that there was the maple top underneath the gold. And
Sure.
in that particular instance, needless to say, it is worthy of a refin to do that. But if ever you
Wow.
guys are in the San Francisco Bay Area, you have an open invitation. This baby has been with me for quite some time,
Oh, wow.
and it's got a hairline crack up the back of the neck. So in traditional collector's realm, it's not collectible. It's been refinished, but it's got the original PAFs, and it is a really neat sounding guitar. And I got it for a song. And
Wow.
there was a period of time, Stu, you remember, So my guess is, there were because one of the stories that you told was being in one of the basement rooms at a guitar shop in London, and I would love it if you would retell that story when we get to the amp section. But my
Yeah.
guess is you saw some pretty amazing instruments. You're like, I should have bought that guitar. So
Right. Yeah.
so I picked this thing up
Yeah.
for a little bit under $2,000. It's not necessarily a collector grade, but I've had it now a couple of decades, and I think I did the math. I've had it close to as long in ownership as it is old. On either side of the spectrum. So I've it's been and because it's been refinished, of course, you don't freak out every time you play it, right? Which is kind of the whole point. You want a
Yeah.
guitar that you can play. So it was
Yeah.
otherwise it becomes a museum piece and it should be sent off to Japan. All
Yeah.
right.
You play the guitar. Don't let the guitar play you.
That's right. Gosh darn it. All right. We couldn't have this be a worship guitar show
No.
and not talk about pedal boards. So before we go too far down the rabbit trail, I would actually like to talk about kind of the separation of the divide. Actually, interesting enough, the American and the British. So, Stu, you're a G2 guy, and
Yeah.
Michael, you're a PBC guy. So, I would love to hear this kind of how you kind of connected. For those of you who don't know, and I presume everybody on this thread knows because this is the Guitar Lust Recovery Group, at least in my part of the group here. But the G2 is Daniel Steinhardt's switching system, which besides the infamous Stu G, Andy Timmons, who I actually have on my other show tomorrow night. So he's a G2 guy. And then there is, of course, the PBC 10 and the PBC 6X. So they're similar but different. So Stu, I would love to start with kind of how did you kind of get connected with Daniel, and how did you end up doing the G2?
Yeah. So many years ago, I was using the Mesa Tremorverb, and when I got my Park amp, which I love the sound of, I wanted to use them both together, and not necessarily in a stereo way, but just as a blend. And so I was using the Palmer isolated, like a tri-line, it was called, the Palmer, and so they were isolated with transformers so that you didn't get hums and things, but there wasn't any phase switching on them or anything. And so I used to carry around little speaker cables with a female on one end, and just flip the phase on them, and just use them like if we were ever touring and having backline things. And anyway, that's how I used to flip the phase. So and as you kind of like build up and you get more experienced and what have you, you're looking for certain level of things. I remember sitting down with Pete Cornish once, who is the guy that built all those amazing pedal boards for Brian May and David Gilmour and whoever else. And I was talking to him about problems that you face in pedal boards, or when you've got an old pedal and it hums or whatever, and he couldn't kind of quite understand what I was saying, because I was saying, how do you get rid of something? And he was like, well, you build it in such a way that it doesn't do it. So I was asking him how you do that kind of stuff. Anyway, so we had done we got a great relationship with Hillsong Church in Sydney, and got to know Darlene Check. And it just turns out that Daniel Steinhardt is Darlene's brother. And so she said to me, he's living in England now. I mean, gosh, this must be nearly 20 years ago, honestly. And he's living in England now, and he's like inventing stuff for guitar players. And so once I was home, what have you, we got connected, and he had just invented the Pro 14 and the MIDI 8, which is like a little switching system. And I couldn't believe it. It was like Christmas had come, because it had buffers built in and stuff like that, and you're switching in whichever loops you wanted in for any given preset. And but it had this phase switch on output too. And I just thought all my Christmases would come in one go. And honestly, I've been a gig rig user ever since. So one thing I love about them is their modular power supplies that work flawlessly, in terms of everything being isolated, especially nowadays with digital pedals that create such a lot of noise down the power side of things. Even tuners, right? So sometimes, say you're using one of those TC Polytunes or something, and I have it so that the tuner's always on. And I was hearing this weird noise once, kind of a glitchy sort of noise, and I noticed that it was whenever the tuner lights were kind of registering. Anyway, you put a gig rig power supply adapter on that, and it completely goes away. So anyway, there you go, kids. A little tip for digital pedals: use a transformer power supply. But so that's how I got working with Daniel, and I use the G2 now. I would say though that the I've never tried it's the Mastermind, isn't it? That you use? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I've never tried them. The attractive thing about them is the size. The footprint. The footprint of the G2 is pretty large, but I love the way it works. I love its workflow. I love how it's not. You don't have to hook a computer up to work it, or to program it. It's very kind of what you see is what you've got, So that, like, for my brain, that works. It's got simple MIDI on it, so I use that to for patch changes on my H9s. And that's it. But I have to do the MIDI mapping on the H9s rather than the gig rig.
St. Pope, what you got for us?
Oh man, well, the MIDI thing was funny for me because I remember I got into it because I started MDing with the Bethel Music stuff, and it was really complicated to be calling out changes or directions or whatever, while playing sometimes fairly intricate parts with another guitar player and doing the tap dance. It was just a lot. And the thing that turned me on to the RJM was, if I was going to do MIDI, I couldn't just be locked into presets all the time, because of the spontaneous nature of, you know, the way Bethel Music does stuff. Like a lot of times, you know, we'd play through the arrangement of a song, but then we could be going anywhere. So I was stressing like, well, man, like I'm going to have one of these like big switcher things and have like my presets on a bottom row and then like all the instant access switches, you know, to be able to do what I need to do. And there's no way I can tour with, you know, some kind of Bradshaw rig or anything like that, you know? And so after seeing, I think Jeffrey was using one, or actually, you know what? Maybe it was Nigel Hendroff that I saw using one. I was like, oh, that looks interesting. And I like that it's got a screen so I can kind of see what's going on. And so I just started doing my homework on all the different MIDI switchers out there. And the RJM was just the one that made the most sense to me. You know, I don't have to hold a switch. I don't have to get to another page or anything to jump back and forth between presets and like an instant access mode. It's just literally on one switch and instantaneous. So I can have my whole song mapped out, but at any time, in any moment, I can just jump inside of that preset and operate it like a normal true bypass strip. And then obviously it'll do all the MIDI and the, you know, the clock and all the other things as well. So I use it, you know, especially now in a very simplified way, but it's one of those things I've just been using it for so long now. And I just love the workflow on it so much that I just, you know, I don't really see myself having a pedal board with, you know, like a working pedal board without one of their products on it. Cause it's just become a part of the way I do things now.
I love it. I think one of the interesting things about guitar players, if you had 10 pedals and 10 guitar players in the same room, they would not place them in the exact same order. Somebody would flip the distortion with the overdrive or would place the fuzz in a particular location. But yet at the same time, you know, there's kind of a workflow. So I would love it if you guys can kind of talk about kind of some of your strategies on your workflow with the pedal board, because it's interesting, you know, as you guys were talking about your builds and stuff, I was thinking, I got an email from a lovely guy this past week, and he's trying to figure out, he has you know, he's got kind of the quintessential board, but he's having a little bit of sound issues and he's getting some noise somehow. And so he's like, you know, thinking about this modeling thing, you know, the Helix, it's one button, you know, well, you guys all must know the worship tutorial guys. I mean, their programming is nuts. And then there's Jem, who also makes great presets. You know, the point being is that the ability to step on one button and have it there is one thing. But as Michael, you were talking about, the idea of basically being able to go into pedal board mode. You know, Stu, I'm kind of curious, are you kind of like, because I remember I was watching you play through the presets on Majesty, and then you kind of dial in this other sound, so you're like, hey, there's this other thing I do. How much do you live in the presets, and how much then do you also just kind of free flow as you're working? And that's to both of you guys.
I think the essence of guitarists is that you have to be free to experiment and go somewhere. You know, I love, you know, my brain. Like I used to be an electrician when I left school a long time ago, so I do have this brain that is kind of like, you know, in slots, and which helps when you're fault finding, for instance, on your pedal board or whatever. You know, you kind of know, okay, I need to isolate this and this. But then, you know, as an artist and a player, when I was at the Guitar Institute in London, the guy said to me, you know, we had this practice regime that was really heavy in terms of what we had to do every day. And but he said, you know, if inspiration strikes, follow that every time. You know, like if writing happens, like follow that every time. And I take that into, I don't want to be so boxed into a way of that I can't then, because you never know what's going to happen, especially in the worship world. You know, always, you know, if the spirit moves, you've got to follow, right? So so you can't be so boxed in that you don't have an ability to follow something and like create that little bit of ambience or atmosphere or a loud thing if that's what's needed. So I really love both worlds. Like I love it all. I think gear is supposed to be used. Like we're supposed to use it. And like to Michael's point earlier, like I don't want a guitar to play me. I don't want the gear to tell me what I can play. I want to be able to control it and use it for what it's great for, and but also have some ability to go off on one if you need to.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, everything Stu just said is dead on, man. Like, for a working guitar player or for somebody who's consistently playing, the same or similar material every weekend, yeah, jump into the MIDI thing and figure it out. But I think at the end of the day, guitar and music and how it all works is just as individual as, the sound of your fingers. And so I think all you really need to do is just find the stuff that is working for you. It's really the only, prerequisite at the end of the day is, does it work or does it not? And if it works for you, then great. It doesn't really matter what somebody else is doing. So that's just kind of always been my approach for it. Like, all right, like, do I have the pedals that I need to get the job done? And then do I have a couple other pedals that are giving me some fresh inspiration and new sounds and make me think differently? Or, how can I reframe something that's been done one way and make it fresh and new? Like, do I have a little bit of both of those things? And then can I make them work together? And so, I mean, even like making that a part of your practice time, if you're really bored of sitting down and playing scales, maybe like, one day just order your pedals differently and figure out what they can do and what they're good at. Find new sounds out of them that inspire you. And also maybe just figure out how they work. Like Stu said, be an electrician. Like, it's our number one responsibility to play well and perform well as a guitar player. But a big part of that is understanding how your gear works and understanding, however much information you need to have to keep it working and performing at the level you need it to perform at. So just even diving into like, simple, like, what does a typical signal chain look like? Or, what is the difference between daisy chain power and isolated power? What's the tonal difference between some of that stuff? And I mean, there's a million different avenues you can go down with all that, right? But, just trying to be well-rounded in all of that kind of stuff, I think can only benefit you as a guitar player. And certainly I can, speak as a testimony to that. I'm not some gear expert. I can't, wire up a tube amp or anything like that. But I know how, in general, a lot of this stuff works, and that helps me get sounds up faster. That helps me, understand what's actually going on, so that I'm not, endlessly searching for something that a pedal's actually not able to do. You basically teach yourself to problem solve. So I think that's kind of a good thing to practice too.
Yeah. I the other week I got a new pedal, and I've used my full drive for, I don't know, 30 years or something, and I wanted to experiment with it off the board, and so I've got this Gladio by Cornerstone Music over in Italy, and it's brilliant. I love it. I love the 2 overdrive setup, and that it's got that you can have both on at once if you want to. Really fantastic overdrive pedal. Anyway, so I put it on my board in the exact space where the full drive was, because I wanted to use it in a similar way, right? You got your crunch on one side and then like sort of boost mode on the other. And I ended up having to put it in a different position in the chain because of the way it worked with the other pedals. So that, like, to your case in point, like back in the day with Delirious, my volume pedal used to go at the front, almost at the front of my chain. The very first thing I used to hit was my old fuzz probe, because that just liked the feel of a pickup going right into it, you know. Yeah, and then my volume pedal would be before my drives, because I used to like the way that felt. And then, you know, as I've been working here and you know, as things developed over the last 10 years, my volume pedal is now after my overdrive section, because I kind of like the way that feels now. Also, that's a good way of keeping noise down, right? So when you're not playing, but you know, it's the eternal and constant search, isn't it? And experiment. But you know, the with the Gladio, my kilt being in front of it didn't sound very good, and then putting it afterwards, all of a sudden it sounds amazing. So so yeah, it's like that experiment. And I often look at stuff and think, I wonder if I should like just try something crazy today. You know, I never do, but
But you could.
but you could.
You could.
Yeah.
Well, you know, that's an interesting thing, because what I was thinking, one of my favorite little hacks, and first of all, I'm always, especially in Helix world, volume pedal after drives.
Yeah.
It's because I've spent so many years playing with a lot of high gain. I
Yes.
hate the sound of a volume pedal preceding the drives, where you're basically starving the drives for input. That's just my own particular thing.
Yeah.
But and that's especially if you play with high gain, because when you take a high gain pedal and you starve it for input, if you're not doing it from the guitar and you don't have a cap in the circuit, instead of it kind of basically being a high pass filter, it just passes all the muck with none of the good stuff. But one of the interesting things about the Helix is whenever I'm playing with a Strat, you pointed out one of a really great strategy, which is putting a noise gate. I always put a noise gate before the drives.
Huh.
Because what it does is it prevents the drive from... Did I put it before? Yeah, because if the drives start to... Right, I put it before the drives because it shuts up any noise coming from the Strat. So before it ever gets amplified and turns into hiss, which at that point, to set the gate loud enough that it can actually capture it, it actually just shuts down the signal beforehand. And what's neat about the gate that's in the Helix there is it really good. But I was just thinking, oh, you could do the same thing on a programmable pedal board. You just have a noise gate somewhere on your pedal board that is only in the bank where you've got your Strat sounds. I was like, so that's kind of like, you know, the interesting thing is the rabbit trailing of like how, because, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, all three of us are stereo guys, right? Quote unquote.
Yeah.
Most days, yeah.
Okay, so like the moment you start connect, and I can't explain the difference of what ground potential is, other than the fact it is bad when you hear it. And you know, kind of my favorite thing is mixing amps. I like it all, but sometimes it's nice to mix non-identical amps, and at other times, you know, so say for example, I'm using some sort of modeling device. I'll go there. The Rev D20. Basically, what I did was I bypassed the front of the amp, went into the power amp in, and then used the speaker emulation to just go straight into Pro Tools. And I was like, it was so clear. But basically, what I was able to do was able to bypass the power amp modeling and use the power amp in the actual D20, which was a pair of 6 V6s on both sides. So you've got this classic kind of deluxe thing happening. And because they're matched, they behave identically, because there are times, again, because Stu, I think most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time you use identical amps such that it behaves in a predictable fashion across the left and right stereo channels. But at other times it's nice to get this kind of tugging thing where they're not behaving the same, because then you're like, oh, and there's nothing like standing in the middle of the amps when they're kind of doing this little seesaw thing, but usually you connect one of them is like, and I know that I use the HumX, and I know that Mason at Vertex is actually not a fan of the HumX. And I'm not throwing Mason under the bus. I think he was on the show with you, Michael, wasn't he, the last time?
Yeah, we did a live show with him.
Yeah. So, and he was like, "Oh, no, 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 no." Yeah, he was like, I'm schematic. And what's great is like everybody has their thing, but the Humex is just kind of like my secret sauce. It's like it also filters out noise, and you guys know what it's like to roll into a venue. You're all excited to play, and all of a sudden you plug in, and basically even your quietest sound is making noise. You're like, so it's like, oh no, this
You
is
know
gonna be
how I
loud.
would get around that with the stereo rig? Man, some guys would hate me. We always had one guy at Bethel that would be like, man, one guitar player dies every year by doing it. But every time we showed up and there wasn't a ground lift or something around, I would literally just unplug the cable and break the ground off the IEC cable for one of the amps, and problem solved. Never been electrocuted, and so far it's worked every time. So, if you want to get dangerous out there, go for it.
I love that. A man on a mission. I can appreciate that. All right.
Yeah, like that. So the electrician in me wants to say that really is only safe if you're using 2 amps and one of them is grounded.
Yeah. Only 2 amps. If I was using one, there wouldn't be buzz unless it was a problem with the board. But yeah,
that's right.
And last thing before we move on to actually amps. I guess we're there. Hang on a second. Glory photo. There we go. Come on. Look at that good stuff. So all sorts of fun stuff happening there. Speaking of stereo amplifiers there, those are Earharts, as I recall, and obviously that's the Marshall in the Park. So let's talk amps here. Stu, those look very loud and angry, if you ask me.
Yeah.
So let's go back to that amp shop story in London.
Okay. Yeah. So Chandler Guitars, Doug and Charlie Chandler. It was in Kew. They're no longer anymore. Charlie's got his own place now, but we used to live in London, and so I used to hang out there a lot. And one day I was in there, and Doug was like, "Oh, I want you to meet someone." So we went down in the basement where they used to have like kind of a viewing area for pros or whatever, and he introduced me to Scott Gorham from Thin Lizzy, and was chatting with Scott and got to play his rig and one of his Les Pauls, and yeah, it's like something I'll never forget. And also, meeting people like that. So I used to watch Thin Lizzy and love their music before I was even playing a guitar, so meeting people who have time for you as a nobody, that's really special to me. And it's something that my wife reminds me of all the time, to always be kind and give as much time as you can to someone that comes up to you and starts a conversation. But yeah, that was a great moment. Scott, he had a combination of Marshalls, and he had why he was there that day was that he had the ADA
MP1.
MP1. That's right. Yeah. And which came up on a forum that I was looking at the other day, and I went to Reverb to see if there was any available. But yeah, because that was a sound of the 80s, wasn't it?
I've got a story that I can't tell you, that I was literally in a call today with a guy. I can't tell you who the guy is. I can't tell you the story, but it's amazing you pulled that down out of ether, because it's that he's using the MP1 and he's just loving it. Michael, you're probably a little young to remember the MP1. Are you familiar with the 80? Not too young, or no recollection of the MP1?
I don't know what that is.
So in late 80s, I guess it maybe mid 80s. So there was a guy actually.
About 1986, 1987.
All right, I got a chance to geek out here. Sorry, the metalhead comes out. So there's a guy named Todd Langer, and Todd Langer was the guy who designed that amplifier, or the MP1, and he also designed the Langer preamp. And he's a guy that I got to know. I think he also studied with Joe Satriani. And unfortunately, Todd is no longer alive, but he was a genius guy. Kind of did the George Lynch like mods on the Marshalls. Of course, George Lynch, for the church folks, we all know who he is because all church folks listen to Dawkins. They're rocking with Dawkins after church. But but he had this kind of high gain mod. Now there was another guy. All right, we're really going down the amp trail here, but I'm going to take the bait all the way. His name was Jamie Rose, and he used to play in a band called Vane. And Jamie, first of all, I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. Vane was in the San Francisco Bay Area. And it's interesting you guys were talking about having time for one another because guys who can really play, well, that didn't quite come out the way I meant it to, but guys who can really play know how to hang out. Like most of the time, the guys who don't have something to prove, they walk into the room and they know they can play. So they don't have to like kind of go, oh, bro, you know. So like Jamie, instantly we were like, yo, what's up? But one of the best metal guitar tones in a club in late 80s. It's one of those sounds front of house. You're like, it was kind of that George Lynch tone, but better. Plexi Marshall modded. And Jamie had done this thing with a mirrored relay that he built into the amp so it had the solo boost. And when the amp went into solo boost, you're like, oh. So in any case, Jamie is, of course, Third Power and just a brilliant amp designer. And just you know, somebody who's been a friend of mine for a very, very, very long time. So yes, amps. Okay, the MP1. So Todd Langer, tube tweaker, as you might call him, you know, just that magic of massaging the circuitry until the amp does that thing. You know, the funny thing is, and I will go there, you know, as much as, and I will say we worship guys, you know, we're always innovating with the pedal board. We're not very adventurous with our amps. I mean, if you think about it, like there's very little modification happening back at the amp. I mean, we're really kind of like, I mean, you know, because you think about the metal, like, you know, there's, the guy that worked on Jose, like Jose's legendary Eddie Van Halen, like, you know,
the old Marshall mods.
Yeah, all the you know, the if it's got a whammy on it, they're having that amp modded. But for the most part, we're like, we'll just keep the amp stock. It's cool. I'll go buy another pedal. But I mean, it's really kind of funny, you know, because you know, so Michael, and we're gonna go. Boy, I'm going fully down the rabbit trail. But I would like to. We were talking, Stu, you and I, about the EF86. The magical, blissful preamp tube for those of us who find them magical and blissful as long as they're not feeding back. Michael, what do you have? The 12AX7 in your AC30, or do you have the EF86?
In my AC30, I've got a 12AX7 right now, but I've got two EF86 amps that I really, really love when they're working the right way. And fortunately, both of them are working quite wonderfully right now. So, yeah.
All right. So it doesn't seem like, because one of the things that I hate when you get a stream and it's like, all of a sudden it's the inside club, right? Like they're having a little private conversation. So if we can, I tell you what, I'll open it up. No, Stu, seeing as you're from the UK, why don't you tell us about, you know, your take on the history of the EF86 and kind of how it got introduced into guitar culture?
I actually don't know. All I know is that I have EF86 on my normal channel on my 90s AC30. I don't know what I've got in my 62 AC30 at the minute, actually. But then my AC15, I have an EF86 channel in there. So I actually don't know the history of it.
Awkward I'd love to pause learn. As I'm switching cameras. Sorry about that. I was like, they kind of like, that's kind of like when somebody gets on the stream, you start doing this. It's like, that's so uncool to do to somebody. So it's my understanding that the vintage AC30s, that was the preamp tube of choice. That's why they had that jangle. And I have never owned a 62 AC30. But as I understand, you know, so like I've got the reissue. the 50th or 60th anniversary, whatever it is, and being the lunatic that I am, I also bought the head because I thought
Okay.
I'll use them as insert. But I mean, it's kind of like, honestly, it's a freshman move. Like, you've got the combo, and so because I just couldn't spend the ridiculous amount of money to go out and spend that much money on a reissue hand wired combo again. And
Yeah.
I basically, I'll actually confess, the wife's on the stream, so she already knows. Like, I stalked Craigslist. So, like, what can I trade for the amp that I really? Finally, I had the head, and I'm just like, all right, I'm buying it. But that has a 12AX7 and an EF86 channel. And, for those of you not in the know, my guess is actually the AC30 Fawn model will be an EF86. And what that is that classic jangle sound that we love so much about the AC30, because the thing about that tube is it has just got this, it's got
It's harmonic.
this harmonic content that when you hit the strings, the harmonics just kind of jump out of the guitar and out of the amp in a really pleasing way, right?
It's a really interesting sounding tube, because typically, like, you don't want your tubes to sound microphonic. But personally, I feel like the sound of a good EF86 tube is that it kind of has a little bit of that microphonic sound, kind of like an old pickup would be that isn't wax potted, or like an old wah pedal. Those sound kind of microphonic. A good EF86 for me kind of has that sound, and it's one of those things. It's like when you get it dialed in and it's working with the amp, it all of a sudden feels like the whole amp just opens up, and just like the whole thing is moving air. It's a finicky tube in my experience. I literally went through, I think, 8 of them. Like, popped one in an amp, played it for like 5 minutes, and then it was like not working at all, and just did that over and over until I got the right one. New stuff, NOS, it was a nightmare. But took it to a tech, and man, what a magical sounding tube.
I failed to mention, there are people that are potentially on the stream that have never actually owned a tube amp, which is actually kind of cool. It's like, it's actually not, oh, they've never owned a tube. It's like that's actually, like, it's kind of cool to think they never had to deal with a tube amp slowly going down the slope of going, one day you're like, it's terrible.
Oh, dude.
But so the 12AX7 and the EF86 are preamp tubes, and basically what those do are they basically create, in the preamp, you create the tone of the amplifier in the power amp section, where I mentioned a 6V6V4 or a 6L6 or an EL34 and EL84. Those power the amplifier. The thing is, when you turn an amplifier up, that's where the magic starts to happen, because the power amp section starts to bloom, and that's where an overdrive pedal, in my opinion, imitates the sound of the power tubes kind of going, what are you doing to me? And I kind of like this. Turn it up more. So, all right. So, Stu, you are, you've stolen the souls of some amplifiers. I don't know if you know about American Indian folklore, but, if you took an Indian's photograph, you were potentially taking their soul. So you're a robber of amp souls. I would love to get your take on, the interesting thing is like, I was watching the Majesty video, and I've got a Kemper here, and I love all gear. I mean, I kind of like, I don't care what it is, but I'm curious, as somebody that has lived with so many different amps, good amps, bad backlines. My guess is like a Kemper is way better than the worst backline any day of the week. I'm curious your take on the whole modeling experience, given where you've been as an artist.
Yeah. Well, I love it, actually. I think we're in the time that we're in, and not everyone can have an amp room like I have. I'm very lucky. Excuse me. And we were talking about this when Michael was over, actually, and just my opinion on all of it is that I've got these great sounding amps. 9 times out of 10, if I can use them, I will. But why I've got an opportunity to share the sounds that I've got with people who can't who don't have them, and people that play in church that have like a Helix or a in particular the Kemper, because that's the one that really kind of profiles your amp. Um, why not like make these things available? So, but I don't just make the stuff to sell. I actually use them as well. So, for instance, I tour with Michael W. Smith in a non-COVID world, and once a year we do a Christmas tour. Some of those dates will be with an orchestra. The stage has got to be silent, and we could run SGI boxes and put the amps out the back with 100 foot of XLR or whatever. But with the Kemper, I've got my same amps that I use profiled in there to a degree that I like, and it's the same every night that I plug it in. I will say that for me as a purist, not having the it's a little bit like hearing your amps and then walking on the stage when they're in another room and putting them on in ears. Like the first time you do that, and that like the first time you're using in ears, it takes a little while to get used to it. And everyone's loving it out front, but it's a little bit like that experience. So like you miss probably 10% of the vibe of not feeling an amp on stage and stuff like that. And but the circumstances sometimes dictate that's what I would prefer to do, and so I think we're in a time like I've my 62 AC30, right? So it also Michael made that sound amazing. Like you loved that amp, didn't you?
I mean, it's not hard with that amp, but I did my best.
Yeah, it's an amazing sounding amplifier, right?
So good.
And
it's so good.
And so I've been experimenting with my Helix by using the impulse response from that cab, which are like original blue speakers, and putting it in the Helix, and it's so ridiculous how the same it is, but when it gets different is like when you're like with the Kemper, for instance, and so some of us like to put pedals in front, and try and use them like an amplifier. That is a different beast at that point. You have to know how that works and how that feels. And one of the things that I do with the Kemper, and there's HW at Tone Junkies got videos for days on all this stuff, and that's how I work with on this stuff, and I love it. But we would recommend that you use a high gain profile and back it off, so that, like, for instance, right, say you've got a profile and you've got 5 profiles of that amp, right? You've got from super clean to super, at 11, right? And the sound that you might like to dial in for your pedals might be the second amount of gain, right? In an amp normally, right? It's just like perhaps just on the edge a little bit of breakup, but it's clean and you got lots of headroom. If you did that with your Kemper, it doesn't have the headroom, right? It doesn't have the headroom to then put like a big fuzz pedal in or something like that, and it sounds a little bit weird. It doesn't sound terrible. It just doesn't sound as open. But if you use like gain 4 and back it off and put your pedals in, all of a sudden it works a lot better. So that's just like one super simple little tip that we use when we're putting pedals in front and playing it live like an amp. But I spend ages like on the profiles and presets that we make. I spend ages getting them to how I like them, but it's how I like them in my environment with my guitars, right? When you then pass them on to whoever's getting them, they're in their environment. And, you know, I would just encourage everyone, use it like you would your gear, like any piece of gear, like use it as a starting point, use it as a canvas, and have fun making it your own, you know.
Yep, that's it.
That's so funny. I got a quote that came here on Facebook. This is hilarious. Management had me switch to a Kemper this year. Purchased one for me. I will say it eliminated problems with the way bad power can affect a tube amp. I still prefer the sound of a real tube amps and still record them, but appreciate what read more Kemper can do for live applications. There we go. Hang on. Just scrolled up. In problem solving. Space it can save on a truck pack. Speed teardown. Consistent sound each night. No stage volume. Kind of there. Yeah.
Yep.
So that's makes it easy.
Yep.
All right. We've sufficiently geeked out. By the way, we're coming up on the hour and a half mark. So you guys feel free to text me. We're not going to go any longer than 2 hours, but if an hour and a half is going to be it, I need you guys to message me and let me know, okay? And that way it's nice and understated. But while we are either fielding or not fielding any of these messages, we have to go here.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Look at that. Now that is the good stuff. That's the stuff that we love. So, So the interesting thing is, I suppose, I'm going to be doing something. I'm going to be doing something with a speaker manufacturer that makes a basically an FR speaker. And so the interesting thing is, part of what that's going to involve is actually going to be miking those up, because, you know, it's kind of like what I did with the Power Engine 60. What's great about the Power Engine 60, or sorry, the Power Engine Juice Deluxe, is it's got a pass-through XLR, whether you're going from the quarter-inch input or the XLR input. The pass-through XLR bypasses the tone controls, and it sounds identical to what's kind of coming into the front end, but you can still tweak the tones with the quarter-inch input on the top of it. So for something like a Kemper, where you're just kind of wanting it to sound like it is in the room, but kind of passing your XLR into it, and then being able to adjust your stage volume and having there's basically 3-band EQ, a 3-band EQ with 12 dB per octave cut. So and I didn't have to use it, but what's neat about it is basically it's instant power, and it's loud, and it behaves much more like a 412 cabinet than any kind of FR kind of powered speaker solution I've used.
Wow.
That said, microphones and amplifiers is one of the most splendid things, because when you know an amp and you know your mics and you get a chance to play and place that. Michael, I found out about this mic from you. You know what this is. And Stu, in this photo right here, actually the funny thing is that there it is.
Yeah.
So
is that yours, Michael? That
maybe.
Is that the one that you brought?
I can't tell from that photo.
Hang on. Sorry. Hang on. Here we go.
Because I ended up buying. Oh no! You know what? That's HW's. That was from a day that we were profiling. But I ended up, after you came, I ended up buying a pair of vintage 545s. Yeah.
So cool.
And I love them. I love them. Yeah. I love them.
They're
with
wonderful.
that with that ribbon that I have, that NOS Panther, sounds really good.
Yeah.
And
I was stoked with the way it was sounding when we were shooting those 4.4 videos. Or 440, sorry. Man, those two microphones were working together really, really well.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. And oh yeah, I was going to say. So I go through API mic pre's, and then into a distressor. Depending on how many amps I've got coming in, I'll have either one or two distressors, which is a compressor, and I just have that kind just tickling it a little bit just to kind of hold it in place. But yeah, it's a joy. Like all that stuff is such a joy.
All right, I've got
I
it.
don't.
I've got a question.
No, I was going to say.
Oh.
Yeah, I was just going to say. Sorry, that I don't use EQ on my way in. One of the producers that I've worked, well, several producers I've worked with over the years, we would. You can do EQ, a lot of EQ in post anyway, you know. But to try and get the sound, get the EQ right with the amp and the mic placement, you know, I was learning that.
Yeah.
I'm feeling guilty, but I'm going to jump in. So just, you know, look, if you've never mic'd up an amp, at the center of the speakers is the dust cap. And with a mic like, you know, some sort of 57, you basically get your iPhone and you put on your flashlight, or preferably you use one of these guys that works about half the time, and you shine it into the grill, and basically you find the edge of that dust cap, and you get, you know, some people like to talk fingers, so some people it's 2 or 3 fingers away from the edge of the grill, generally about an inch and a half. And so the idea is, and it's an interesting thing. When I started miking these cabinets, I had to remember, you know, the interesting thing, you guys have placed so many mics. Every so often you get out of the mic placing thing, and I don't know about you, but I've been far enough out that I kind of like, and I started so there is something called the proximity effect. And the closer you place the mic, the more it begins to sound bassier. And so if by chance the amp is sounding too bright, the instinct sometimes is to increase the proximity effect. But the reality is there's a perfect spot, and gosh dang it, it's almost always at the edge of the dust cap, that you can find by moving the mic, again, about that inch and a half out. At the edge of the dust cap is usually in the right place, and somehow I think I moved it in a little closer to the center of the speaker, and I was like, oh, it's a little bright, I'm going to move it in. And basically what I did is I took the whole equation and I screwed it up, you know, because it was like I was like, it was too bright, so then I added the proximity. Now I've got this big squashy thing that I'm like, that doesn't sound anything like the amp. And the great thing about mic placement is, generally speaking, if you've got a great sounding mic, you can learn to place the mic in the place where it sounds like what's going on in the amplifier. And that, you know, kind of is alluding to what Stu was talking about, which is a great sounding amplifier. You just want to capture that. Like you're and because if it's the right guitar, the right player, and the right performance, you just want to capture that in its essence. If you need to add EQ in post, so be it, which I pretty much never do, but the idea is hopefully finding that right sound that just starts there. So in any case, that edge of the dust cap, about an inch and a half away, starting there is a great place to start, and just gently moving the mic a little bit, one way or the other, is a great way to go. And then what I did, it was just a freshman move. I'm like, I'll just push it right up on the grill. That'll make it bassier, and it destroys the balance that is what a microphone has the ability to pick up on a speaker. So that is enough from me. Gentlemen, I would love to hear your insights and tips and brilliance on the art of miking tube amps.
Do you want me to? Yeah, go on. Michael's the expert, really.
I'm no expert, man. I come from a very like don't overthink it approach with it. Yes, I'm always a big fan of like get the sound at the amp first, and you know move the microphone in a position. But then there's also sometimes too, like when you're really really familiar with an amp, or even sometimes if you're really familiar with just a microphone, like a lot of times doesn't matter what amp I'm playing. If I've got a 545, I kind of stick it in the same spot every time, and that's maybe a little further towards the edge than you were talking about, Doug. I normally find the dead center of the speaker, and then I find the edge, and I'll put that microphone right in between those 2 points as a starting place. And then for me, that kind of tells me, like, if I need more of what the amp is doing, I can move it closer into the center of the speaker, If I need a little bit less, I can move it back out. And then yes, the proximity thing. But I tend to just kind of throw microphones in that one spot, and 99% of the time I'm happy with that tone. And then if I need to make a fine tune adjustment, like I have no problem, making the amp just a little bit brighter if that needs to happen, or taking just a little bit of low end out. And even talking about like EQing on the back end too, like I'll get tones and get everything dialed with the amp when I, do the song, but then I'll actually go through once I've tracked all my parts in a song. And this is if I'm working at home. I never have time to do this kind of thing if I'm working at another studio or something, or if there's another engineer. That's just a fast way to make that guy angry. But I'll usually go through and I'll do tiny little EQ tweaks on all the different guitar tracks just to make sure that everything is lining up and kind of fitting the way that I want it to. So, maybe a little bit of a different approach, but I think especially now that there's so many things out there now that model a speaker and a microphone, I feel like I hear a lot of those guys talking about, oh man, it's such a pain to mic up an amp. It's so hard to do. You got to worry about this and that and phase and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, you do. But, at the end of the day, it's really not that hard. And just by keeping things really, really simple with having like one good, decent microphone, whether it's a 57 or a 545, and good source tone, you can roll the world with that and get, great results with that all day. So, it's more accessible, I think, than is, told to people these days.
I'm going to actually throw some. I'm sorry, Stu.
No, I was agreeing.
I'm going to throw in some props for the Roswell Pro Audio Mini K47. Those are the one mic. 95% of every sound source I've needed to capture in the room, I've captured it with basically that mic and just kind of like, there it is. Better than any other mic that I've had. I will say the Audio Technica. There's one of the really expensive Audio Technica mics. I'm going to forget the. I'll come up with a model number. Dumble style amplifiers have enough massive range of frequencies, whether it's a Dumble or a Dumble clone, that they are actually very hard to capture. And so that the Audio Technica mic, and I'll grab it in a sec. I'll hop off screen here. That mic is really great for capturing those sounds. I also have. Have you guys tried the R10? The Royer guys are I've been friends with them for a decade or so, and so there's a church that's using the 121s, but predominantly the R10. Have you, Stu or Michael? Have you tried the R10s?
I have not.
No.
So they showed up yesterday, and I haven't had a chance to put them up. But I'm a Royer fan. To tell you the truth, I like all mics. But there's a thing. Okay, gentlemen, you touched on the EQ thing, so I'm kind of curious. Stu, you're an API, but not necessarily adding an EQ. You're getting the sound of that preamp on the way into the box. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, and then just using the sound of the amp and the mic position to capture what I want. Now, at the end of the day, and I think I was talking about this when Michael was here too, but like your mix engineer is probably going to take out everything up below 200 hertz anyway, but I actually really like mid and top. Like honestly, on a guitar sound, that's what I want to hear, and I like the way my Park and my Marshall and my AC30s, I wind them into their have a great top end, and so sometimes I'm moving it a little bit more to the edge and a little bit more in to get that little bit of fatness, but people aren't going to hear that in a record anyway.
And if they hear it, they may not even know that they're hearing it, which is a whole different conversation. But that's okay. There are people that appreciate all this minutia. Michael, are
Yeah.
you an in the box EQ guy? Are you an API guy? Are you a Neve guy? As I recall, you are a Universal Audio.
Yeah.
Stu, are you a UA guy, or what's your in the box juice?
Yeah, I do have a UA. Yeah, Apollo.
Michael,
Yeah.
are you an in the box EQ guy? And if so, are you API or you Neve? Where do you live?
I'm both. So for me, preamps are just like guitars, like amplifiers, like pedals. Preamps absolutely have a sound. API is that really fast, transient, really big, punchy guitar thing. Neve has a very open, very soft character. There's I love the Chandler TG2, that kind of dirty British mid-range Beatles EMI sound. Preamps have a sound too. So, we've kind of got our studio split up, but I like to mix up preamps and kind of change tones with that. But here at home, I'm just running APIs. I have a pair of 512C pre's that are just workhorses, and I love those things. So I'm on API as well. I don't often EQ into the box. I do have a pair of 550B EQs, which are really, really great API EQs. And, most of the time I'll use that if I need to like track an acoustic guitar or something like that. And maybe, once in a blue moon for electric, but most of the EQ I'm on electric is in the box. And it's really just, it's either I'll use the Fab Filter Pro Q to high pass and to fix little problem frequencies, or, to sometimes I'll actually like, if I want like a really lo-fi guitar sound, instead of using an EQ pedal or something, I'll use that plugin. There are a lot of mix guys use that plug. It's a phenomenal EQ. And then a nice little trick too, kind of referencing the UAD stuff. Sometimes, once you get your guitar tracks layered in a song, maybe you want a little bit more air and sparkle on a certain guitar part. And so I'll just put a Pultec on it and just bump some 10K, on a Pultec to give it a little more bright top end and air. And so that's kind of usually what I'm doing with EQ.
I love it. I found, hang on, let me bring everybody back into the picture here. There we go. I found that mic though. There it is. It's a 5040.
Oh, cool.
And
cool.
I mean, everybody's first vocal mic is a 4040, right? I mean, it's just gonna, the Audio Technica 4040. It's a sub $400 microphone. It's a great vocal microphone. It's kind of like you're gonna get people over. So people don't necessarily think of Audio Technica as a $3,000 microphone, but that 5040 is a great sounding. In fact, I've never used it. I have used it on the Voxes as well, but for the kind of the Dumble cloney amplifiers where there's all this complex information, have you guys? What do you guys do when you find I mean, I guess you use a combination of this guy and a ribbon. Is that what you do when you have an amp that has a lot of complex information going on? And what is your approach for dealing with that?
My go-to is to use the a 57 style with the ribbon. Sometimes I prefer the sound of the Beta 57. That has a little bit more of a wider dynamic range. And it doesn't, like the 545 has a smoother kind of mid-high section. But if that information is not too harsh, The Beta 57, I really like that as a dynamic mic as well as the ribbon. But sometimes I use two dynamics. I mean, it's kind of like more about what I've got. I don't have a 67 or something, or a big fat condenser that I can experiment with. I've got a range of dynamics and the ribbons. So it's normally a combination of those. And the simpler the better sometimes, by just using the 545.
Yeah, I'm kind of a simple approach as well. I almost, unless I'm at a studio where another engineer is taking care of something, at that point, it's whatever they want to do. I just roll with that. But if I'm engineering myself, I almost never blend microphones. It's just one mic, and especially if I'm running stereo. I don't know, phase and all that kind of stuff can be funny, and I honestly just kind of like to not think about it. But for the most part, I'm just a one microphone guy, and it's usually a 545. I like other microphones. I really like the Beyerdynamic M160 for ribbon stuff. Also, those Panthers at Stu's place sounded awesome. But actually, a little while ago, I found a new mic that it's not out yet, and I've been like kind of on edge, waiting for it to come out, because I've never been more stoked with a microphone sound. I was at Gabe Wilson's studio, and we had a really, really great engineer who actually is here in Nashville. His name's Craig Alvin. The dude's amazing. He's just like, oh my God, he gets the most amazing tones. And he brought this microphone with him from a company called Heiserman. And the cool thing about what Heiserman does is they actually make their own condenser capsules for like 47s, 67s, that kind of a thing. And if you look back on my Instagram page, you can see a photo of it. But they've got this new microphone that they've been working on called a Type 19. And it's essentially a FET 47 condenser, but in like a paintbrush style enclosure. It almost looks like one of those old like RCA very whatever ribbon enclosures. But that microphone sounds absolutely insane. It's so huge. I mean, the range on that thing is just crazy. But because they build their capsules so well, you can stick it pretty close to an amp without worrying about it, farting out or breaking or, any of those things that you often have to worry about with some of those, fragile ribbons or condensers. So I'm kind of a 545 guy until that microphone comes out. But actually until then, as far as, working at home, I'm actually using the aux and having great success with that actually. So, yeah, it's just another thing, really, really simple.
And do you use an iPad controller?
No, I just do it on my computer. Honestly, I kind of set the aux up. I went back and forth with a bunch of cabs, and I kind of set the rig knob up to have 4 or 5 different cabinet microphone combinations. But I kind of just leave it set on one thing all the time, and that's like every amp goes through that. And then I have a couple like weirdo ones if I want a like specialty tone. But it's pretty much just the same cabinet on the aux, and then I'll let the guitars and the amps, change up the sound.
What is? Do you know what it's set to?
It's the Boutique Upright 212, not the Alnico one. So whichever.
2-rock? Is that a 2-rock?
Yeah, it's the cabinet that looks like a 2-rock. Honestly, I just switched through them all and was like, which one sounds the most familiar, and that one just did. And then and then for microphones, I think, I think I'm using the 421, and then blending in some of the condenser 67. microphone. And then I'll use a little bit of room to just kind of sound like I call it a micro reflection. Like even if you close mic a open back cabinet in the room, you still get a little bit of room sound. So just a tiny little bit of room, but that's it.
We're gleaning everything that we can. I'm looking at Stu's face. He's like, he's putting it in, what do you call it, in the boxes or whatever it is that you're doing. It's like filing it. He's got the box open. He's filing ribbon,
Definitely.
Oh
microphone,
man, I
speaker
don't know.
cabinet.
Guys, I don't know what I'm doing. I just flip through stuff until yep, that sounds right, and then I kind of stick with stuff. I'll say this too, like with all this gear stuff, and especially for anybody writing, recording, whether you do this as a job or whether you do this in for fun, the most important thing for me is actually not my guitar sound. It's staying creative and coming up with parts that are musical and are doing something that communicates what the song is trying to communicate, So for me, everything with the gear is really about how can I get a sound that works, leave that set up so that I can just flip it all on and create. That's all I want to do. I don't want to spend too long getting a tone because, you pull up a track in Pro Tools, right? And you get that initial spark of creativity, like, oh, I've got this idea. And then you go about setting up the tone for it. But half the time, by the time you get the tone up, you're like, wait, how did that part go? And there comes a point where I think the dialing in the sounds and all that kind of stuff can sometimes take away from the creative flow. And yes, there's absolutely times where it adds to it. So that's great. But for me, I'm looking for stuff that I can kind of just set and forget for the most part and just constantly be creating and throwing out ideas and going for things. There's a million different points in your signal chain to tweak and change your guitar sound. And so for me, the more I can kind of let a guitar do that, as opposed to, running into another room and moving a microphone or something like that. Like that's kind of where I'm at these days. Like once I get it set, I leave it there and I'm happy with that sound. I know it's a usable sound. It's great. And then I can just let the different guitars do the talking. I can let pedals do the talking. I've only got 2 amps set up here. I've been using these 2 amps basically this whole year because that's just, thank you, COVID. But just a Benson Chimera, which is a 30-watt 6v6 amp, and then a Bad Cat Cub 40, which is, I call that like my Nashville amp. It kind of sounds like a matchless, but a little more towards a Marshall than a Vox kind of thing. And that's the L34. And it's just one of those 2 amps into the aux. And I don't even think about it anymore. I just turn it all on and play. And there's been such a creative freedom in that it's like, that's really getting me going these days. And you can maybe tell because I'm ranting and making nonsense now, but
right.
The gear stuff is fun, but when it comes time to write and work, and especially if you're at a studio on somebody else's time, time is money no matter where you are. And so just staying in that creative flow, like I think not only do you perform better at your job that way, but I think you also write better stuff because you're not always thinking, oh man, I got to tweak, this one frequency or where'd that pedal go? It's on some shelf and I can't remember where it is, all that kind of stuff just sometimes pulls you out of that creative zone. So, I guess that'd be my advice for the night. Get your stuff dialed in so that you can stay in that creative place and then use your off time to kind of fine tune it and dial it in. Sorry, I know I got off track there, but yeah, it just kept coming. So I just kept talking.
It's good.
I love that. All right, I'm going to ruin you guys.
Oh no.
Oh yeah. No, so if you're looking for, this is the Princeton Reverb hand-wired reissue.
Oh, okay.
There was a period of time that Fender was not getting their reissue amps, the reverb right. This amp is, I hope I don't offend anybody when I say that it's a religious experience. And and given the where we're headed with this, the idea of being able to sit down with an amplifier, I might have a clip, and sit down with an amplifier and actually just play straight into it, and have exactly what you're talking about. That Michael, Pinky, Telecustom. Here we go. This is. I guess I'm going to be an idiot because you'll see in a moment. It's this guitar,
Okay.
but the thing is it's straight into that amplifier, and that thing that you're talking about, where you just sit down and all of a sudden you play, and like there's another idea and another idea, and it's almost like you're pulling post-its off of a pad, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I can't believe. All right, I got to play this because this is for me was just that experience.
Yeah.
That's exactly that thing where you're talking about. And I like
Right.
hours later, I'm like, and then the
Yep.
thoughts start rolling because the Fender folks sent that for review. And after about 2 hours, I'm like, how am I going to possibly convince my wife that I have to have another amplifier? It was like, and it's here. I was just like, I have to. I mean, you guys have both played through a bunch of Fender amplifiers. Michael, what was that model that you guys like forced the prices up because you guys were using it at Bethel?
The ProSonic, which all the Fender guys are like, man, that's like the worst Fender amp they ever made. It was a '90s custom shop amp that I think Bruce Zinke designed. And the thing with that amp, there's a trick to it, and this is a Chris Greeley thing. He figured this out. And Chris is like the perfect example of like he doesn't really pay attention to the guitar community. He just finds stuff that he likes the sound of, and I think that's such a great way to do things. But he figured out that if you take that amp and you put a 5751 in the V1 position, it makes that amp just sound crazy huge and awesome. But the trick to it is like there's so much gain going on even on that clean channel. You barely have you can barely get that volume knob at 2, and it's already peeling paint off the walls and just loud as all get out. But there's a sound in that with that setting, and that's what we used for all the Bethel stuff. Was probably a good 80% of the time was a ProSonic with that tube kind of on that setting, and then like a reissue AC30, or we had a JMI there as well, which I think was a more boutique-y, more accurate reproduction of the 60s AC30 with the top boost circuit. So that was, pretty much all the Bethel stuff while I was there.
Amazing.
Stu, I don't know about you. I'm writing notes on the inside of my my eyelids.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually don't own a Fender amp at all. Pretty much, like I've got my WEM does a similar thing for me to my ears. But yeah, pretty much everything I've got apart from the Mesa. I think that's the only 6L6 amp I've got, and then everything else is EL34s and EL84s.
I mean, you of course would know this, but basically the Boogie is a Fender. I mean that's what one of the neat things about it is, I don't what Boogie do you have?
A tremor verb, so it's a dual
That's right,
rectifier.
That's right.
Yeah,
How metal of you.
I know. It's got that high gain setting on it too. It's awesome.
But that's funny. All right, there are a couple questions in here. We're getting really close to the end. Jem had a question for Michael that I've been trying to find a moment. So he said, "Hey, Michael, because you're not a digital guy, do you take the smaller combos or heads with you whenever you're touring/recording without using a backline, or you did take something like an aux box with you? Have you taken? Uh,
No, I am really lucky in that in all of my touring experience, I've never I've never been made to do the modeling thing. I've definitely pissed off a couple like local venue managers with amps in a back room kind of a thing. But I mean that never ends up really being that much of an issue because you're in a different city the next night, right? But yeah, like for me these days, like the whole reason I even got the two little 15-watt Bensons was because I wanted to be able to have the amps a little bit closer to where I'm stood on stage without seriously offending a sound engineer. And I actually really love the sound of smaller tube amps kind of mic'd up. I feel like depending on the right ones, and for me it's really these two Bensons and then like a good Fender Princeton would be like, it's quiet enough to not hurt anybody, but it'll still keep up with a drummer, and you can put a microphone on it and it sounds really, really great. I mean, like Mike Campbell's the prime example of that, right? Like a Tweed Deluxe and a Blackface Princeton, and that's been his rig forever. And those are just, I mean, obviously he's got some others in there as well, but those two tiny little amps, just mic'd up. I mean, if that's good enough for a stadium, then I can certainly rock two little 15-watt Bensons anywhere. And the thing about those two amps specifically too is like the way they transition into overdrive is a little more gradual than some lower wattage amps. So they don't just top out and get like overly compressed and overdriven. They actually have this really open, sweet thing that they do. So I can still use all the pedals and all that kind of stuff and have them in the zone just without, offending anybody with volume or offending myself too. Cause the fastest way to make me grumpy was for me to turn up at church at 6:30 a.m. and have to stare an AC30 in the face and crank it up and get the sound, and then do the same thing with the Fender, because those ProSonics were like 60 watts or something. Maybe they were 30 or 40 in the setting that we used them on. But I mean, 30 watts is loud. 15 watts is loud,
It is.
So yeah, I love little amps as well. I mean, it's kind of the thing too. Like, you hear any Guitar Hero, like they've got their huge stacks on stage, but it's like, oh man, that tone you got on that record sounds amazing. Oh, thanks, man. It was this, little cheap pawn shop amp or a Princeton or a tiny amp, and they cranked up the pre's or something, So it's all got its own sound. So, do the high headroom thing. It sounds awesome, but the low wattage thing is awesome too.
As we round the bend for the end of the night, somebody had asked me if I tried the NT ones, and yes, I've got a pair. Oh, that was Steve. Yeah, I've got a pair of them here. They're great mics. I'm reviewing the Sony shotgun for Sony for Worship Musician, and then I had the NTG5 that I was reviewing, which is also a great shotgun. And then I've also got the Audio Technica. I think it's a BP60. That's really scary that I've gone geeky on shotgun mics now too. Oh boy.
I don't know how you remember all those numbers, man. I get it all confused.
I couldn't remember the AT5040. So, all right, gentlemen, this has been a real, I mean, I love, and I must admit, Michael, you were not the only one that got chatty, and I love the fact that we've managed to touch on some of the fun stuff here that is, so awesome. Are there any things that you guys would like to kind of add as we ride off into the sunset?
Oh man, I would say any church guitar player my age, if you're millennial or maybe even younger, if you want to hear the best guitar tone and the best guitar parts on any church music record, period, go back and listen to all of World Service over and over and over and over, and let your mind be blown away. Just even some of the chords being used. It's even so. I was listening to it just the other day. It's refreshing to hear church music that isn't just 1 5 6 4. and oh man, we're special because we threw the 2-chord in. Yeah, that's my bit of advice. Go back, listen to that record, crank it up, and just get really, really inspired. Because that record will never get old.
Oh, that's so kind of you. Thank you. Yeah, so great. I would just love to encourage everyone. It's a weird time. We don't know what you're going through, or some people are more affected than others, and just want to encourage people that it's going to be okay. Like at the end of the day, God's got you, and He's on your side, and the blessing through every hard time is His presence with us. So I hope everyone is doing okay and be encouraged, and we're going to get through this time.
I love that.
So good.
One of the things that I had a chance to kind of dig into this afternoon, and we covered it in the magazine, was the whole Beatitudes project, and there were a couple of quotes that I pulled there, and Stu, you were kind of talking about this concept of being upside down, and and I want to briefly, as we're getting out of here, there are times we find ourselves, part of the human condition is that seasons end, and I'll speak from my own experience in the church world. For me, some of the seasons that ended did not end well, and that can be hard, and you can feel very upside down. Stu, there was this one quote that I was like, oh, I gotta write this down. That the co-suffering savior meets us there, and this changes everything. The interesting thing is, I certainly would never wish somebody go through a hard time.
Yeah.
But the fact that at the end of that hard time, there's a co-suffering savior to meet you there is kind of like, the great thing is that, to me, peeling the pieces out of the way, it's like when I'm done trying to make it work myself, and I've actually failed in the process of trying to actually make it work, and it's all kind of falling apart. That's where the co-suffering savior meets me. I'm like, wow, that's kind of like, that's kind of a God thing.
Yeah.
That was,
thank you. I the whole mystery of God taking on flesh and becoming one of us and identifying with us and being tempted just as we are, and yet without sin, and but putting on human flesh and coming to dwell amongst us. And in the Beatitudes project, we talk about the blessing being presence, and with the idea that sometimes life flips upside down for us, and we get knocked off track. We get all these surprising things happen, but the blessing in that is that He's with us in that. He's with us in the ache and the lack and the longing of life, and invites us to then be present to the condition in ourselves and to other people too, and for us to be on their side, and in that way we kind of embody that presence of God for the whole world. So the beatitudesproject.com if you want to find out any more about that.
We like to close out in prayer. So Stu, would you be so kind as to lead us out?
Yeah.
Please?
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. Yeah. Father God, thank you for your presence with us. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for Doug. Thank you for Michael. Thank you for our collective histories. We're really grateful for the way you've had your hand on our lives through good times and bad. And in our conversations, Lord, with gear and with the spiritual stuff, I pray that it goes out there and touches everyone that hears it, and that you would encourage people, that you would help us to become better musicians, and that you would help us become the best versions of ourselves that we can possibly be. Lord, would you bless Worship Musician Magazine? And we thank you for this time. And we're incredibly grateful, Lord. Amen.
Nothing like hanging out with some tall trees. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Worship Musician is dedicated to really helping teams and individual musicians reach their potential. You know, we think of a lot of things when we think about media and think about magazines, and there's a whole bunch of stuff out there. But we really, Bruce Adolph, the founder of the magazine, has spent decades doing everything that he can to pour into teams, and it's always free. It's a resource for you, your tech team, whatever it is, worshipmusician.com. We're here to serve you. The show, we're here every Wednesday night. If you haven't already, you know, especially if you're coming in on YouTube, we invite you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell. I realize you hear this on a lot of different things, but we're here to try and serve you. That is our real heart, and so it's a privilege to do that. Speaking of privilege, wow, total gear geekery, and just a nice healthy dose of the Holy Spirit as well. Thank you so much for making time. Everybody that hung out with us tonight, thank you. You know, there are other things that you could have been watching this evening. And we are thankful that you chose to spend the time with us.
Yep.
Yeah. Very grateful. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Good night and God bless.
Good night.